Have you ever just stopped and wondered, why do we cry? I mean, it's one of the most basic things we do as humans, right? But for literally centuries, it's been this huge scientific puzzle. So today, we're going to dive into this fascinating mystery. You know, even the great Charles Darwin, the father of evolution, was totally stumped by this. Back in 1872, he basically just threw up his hands and said that emotional tears were, well, pointless. He thought they were just a biological accident because he couldn't see any evolutionary reason for them. But here's the thing. For the last century and a half, science has been slowly but surely proving him wrong. And it turns out our tears are anything but purposeless. They're actually this incredibly sophisticated tool with a kind of hidden power. Now, to understand that power, we first have to know what we're talking about. Because, and this is key, not all tears are created equal. So let's break down the basic biology. Our bodies make three totally different kinds of tears, and each one has a very specific job. First, you've got your everyday basal tears. Then there are your emergency reflex tears. And finally, the ones that hold the real mystery, psychic tears, or as we usually call them, emotional tears. All right, so first up, basal tears. You can think of these as the unsung heroes of your eyes. They're working 24/7, keeping everything lubricated, nourished, and protected. It's like this constant invisible shield against all the dust and junk that's floating around. Next, we have reflex tears. This is your eye's emergency flush system. You know when you're chopping onions and suddenly the floodgates open? Or you get smoke in your eyes? That's your body just hitting the emergency flush button, washing out whatever's irritating your eye to keep it safe. And that brings us to the main event, emotional tears. Now, these are the fascinating ones because they are chemically different from the other two. Seriously, studies have shown they're packed with higher levels of protein-based hormones, one of which is a major indicator of stress. And get this, they even contain a natural painkiller. So when you have a good cry, you are literally releasing stress and pain-related chemicals. Okay, but why, right? Why did we humans evolve this totally unique ability? This is where things get really interesting. We're going to shift from what tears are to why we have them. And it turns out there's a huge evolutionary advantage. You see, emotional tears aren't just some random bodily function. They are a form of communication, a sophisticated, nonverbal language that, as far as we know, is completely unique to humans. They send this incredibly profound signal, all without a single word being spoken. Just think about it from an evolutionary point of view. Other animals, when they're in distress, they make noise, loud squeals or cries. But that's super risky. It's like sending up a flare for predators. Humans, on the other hand, evolved a visual signal. Tears are a silent cry for help, visible only to those right there with you. It allows us to communicate vulnerability without broadcasting our location to danger. It's a brilliant shift from a loud protest to a quiet appeal. And that right there is the core function of our emotional tears. They work as a kind of social glue. By showing our vulnerability in a safe, silent way, tears become this incredibly effective tool for getting empathy and support from our group. It's a powerful, unspoken request for connection that strengthens our social bonds. Okay, so we've all heard the phrase, just have a good cry, you'll feel better. It implies that shedding tears is this big, cathartic release that automatically fixes things. But is that actually true? Does it really work that way? Well, the data is surprisingly mixed. Research shows that only about half of people report feeling better after they cry. Around 10% actually feel worse, and a huge 40% say they feel no different at all. So clearly, the act of crying itself isn't some magic bullet for a better mood. So what's the missing piece of the puzzle here? Well, it seems the benefit of crying isn't just in the act itself, but in the reaction it gets. We are way more likely to feel better after crying when someone offers us comfort and support, or if it helps lead to a solution. It's that social connection that really makes the difference. And this whole social aspect brings us right to how we think about crying today. You know, for something so fundamental to being human, our cultural views on it are incredibly complex, especially when it comes to linking tears with strength or weakness. Studies pretty consistently show a big gender gap. On average, adult women cry somewhere between 2 and 5 times a month, while men cry between 0 and 1 time. What's really telling is that this difference doesn't exist when we're babies. It's largely attributed to cultural socialization, where boys are often taught to suppress their tears. This leads us right into one of the biggest myths about tears, that crying is a sign of weakness. It's a powerful cultural belief, but it's one that history and psychology simply do not support.
In fact, if you go back in history, crying was often seen as manly. In medieval epics, you've got heroes like Beowulf and King Arthur weeping openly without any shame. And today, modern psychology frames the ability to cry as a sign of emotional intelligence and self awareness.
All right, let's tackle another common myth. You've probably heard this one, that a good cry is an emotional detox, that you're literally flushing stress toxins out of your body. Well, there's no real evidence for this. That feeling of relief actually comes from your nervous system shifting gears to calm you down, and from that social support it can generate. It's not about the physical fluid. But speaking of that fluid, you are not going to believe this. The average human produces between 15 and 30 gallons of tears every single year. Isn't that wild? So, if tears aren't a weakness, but a uniquely human language designed to signal vulnerability and create connection, it leaves us with a pretty profound question. In a world that so often encourages us to hold it all in, what do we lose as a community if we forget how to weep?